What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today's episode is episode number 104, what Bryan and I are calling the cardio episode. I think it's very, very funny that we are actually doing this, considering the podcast is called Eat, Train, Prosper. But as you guys have probably noticed from some of the just kind of aside conversations and things that Bryan and I have had throughout, let's say, like the last quarter of the podcast, we have been adding in a little bit more cardio ourselves. I'm not sure if that is us becoming wiser or just becoming more frank or kind of understanding of the fact that we are not getting any younger and things become a little bit more important as you age, and just seeing that with clientele and sorts of things. But we're going to cover kind of what Bryan put together the frame of this episode, and we're going to cover kind of things that we're seeing, how we would recommend implementing use, and then a little bit more in terms of like practical type stuff. But before we jump into that, as always, Bryan, kick us off with some updates, please.
Yeah, I'm excited for this episode. I have obviously been flirting around this topic for a number of months now, and so I had a ton of DMs, and by a ton I mean like 4, but like a ton of DMs from people being like, "You guys really need to do an episode on cardio." And given that it's something that is part of my updates these days consistently, I felt like it would be a prudent move to kind of do a deeper dive into that. So that is how we got here. But before we get going, so last week we both talked about our injuries, our limitations and setbacks, which I thought was a great kind of intro to that episode. And to provide further kind of update on that, as of last week, I had all the good intentions of skiing with my dad on Thursday for this trip that we are taking. But as I was packing the car up to go on the trip, I decided it would probably be prudent to actually make sure that my hamstring can do dynamic movement. And so I started kind of like bending over faster, with less caution, changing direction, stuff like that. And I quickly realized that my hamstring was not okay under those conditions. It was a bit of a facade, because it's okay when I'm biking or when I'm doing quads in the gym, but very much not okay when exposed to unpredictable aspects. And what is skiing? Well, it's kind of the definition of unpredictability. You don't know what kind of bump is going to show up, whether the lighting is going to change, if somebody's going to get in your way. And the one thing I couldn't do pain-free was bend over quickly. I would always have to bend over very cautiously, kind of make sure that I'm not sticking my butt too far back. I'm just more bending over from my back. These are things you can't control on the ski slope. And so ultimately I decided that would be a poor decision in my life, and ended up taking my dad up there anyways. But instead of skiing, we did a 2-hour, I call it the executive cycle, but it's basically hot tub, cold dunk, steam shower, cold dunk, hot tub, cold dunk. Their cold dunk wasn't exactly cold like I had hoped it to be. So it was a indoor-outdoor pool that I would say was probably in the 70s. So by no means was the temperature like cold, like a cold dunk. You would expect it to be in the 40s probably. The pool was in the 70s, but it was 6 degrees outside. And so when you would get in 70-degree water and be outside, it was actually this extremely cool, refreshing experience. And then especially coming from the steam room for 15 or 20 minutes, and you're just like, and then you go into the 70-degree pool, and it was perfect. So that experience was great. We did dinner, really nice dinner. I completely overate. First time I had done that in a while, and felt awful the next day. But we did dinner, we did a movie, and then we went home. Yeah, hand up, what you got?
So overate in terms of like we just ordered a bunch of desserts, or like did it just sneak up on you? I'm just curious here.
Yeah. So no, I here's here's how it started. So dinner actually itself wasn't super unhealthy. I got an appetizer, which was like a birria tostada, so it was like some beef on a tostada type thing. And then my dinner was a sirloin steak with broccolini and mashed potatoes. So none of that was too bad. They had the most incredible bread rolls that they brought with butter. And my dad is keto, and occasionally he'll dip out of keto just very briefly, but he never goes like super crazy with it, right? And so he had a Caesar salad or something like that, and he wanted a piece of bread, but I had already eaten all three of the bread rolls that they brought us. So they brought a second batch of bread rolls, which my dad decided to break off 1/4 of one bread roll. And then I was left with 3.5 bread rolls in this basket. And I was like, well, gosh, these can't go to waste. So 3 tablespoons of butter later, I had finished the remaining 3 bread rolls, now putting my total to 6.5 bread rolls. And then I did end up deciding to say, you know what, the day is screwed now. I may as well just have dessert too. And yeah, then we watched a movie, fell asleep. Aaron and I were talking off air about a new Sigma Nutrition podcast where they're talking about biological night and melatonin rise and how it's a really bad idea to eat like super close to when your melatonin rises. And essentially what I was doing was eating exactly when my melatonin was rising and eating thousands of calories at that point. So basically I slept awful, woke up a number of times sweating in the middle of the night because there's just way too many calories trying to be burned through my body, and woke up, lethargic and all that stuff the next day. So it's just one of those things, I don't do it too often anymore, but it was enjoyable in the moment and then immediately regretful. It's kind of the way it goes. So anyway, that was the ski trip. We came home and all was good. That afternoon, I actually got to train my hamstring, which was up next on the agenda. And not really surprising, but I couldn't really do much with my right hamstring. I could use 25 pounds on my single leg seated leg curl, which was actually kind of more than I thought I'd be able to do, but I was using 3 times that for my right hamstring. And then I could do hip extensions, but I didn't use any weight and I had to move really slowly. So it's definitely lingering. It's not something that, based on how fast it healed in the first day or two, I thought that I was going to be able to ski, and then I thought it was going to be fully better within a matter of a week. And it just, it's one of those things. It's just lingering a little bit, but it's, I'd say 80%, 85% better at this point. How's your knee doing?
So let's see. Last week on the podcast, I talked about the day before I had injured it. I was able to train legs yesterday. So literally 1 week after, I opted to not take the hack squat because that's how I injured it, and instead I replaced that with the leverage squat. So it's kind of like the poor man's pendulum sort of thing.
Yep.
Which is a machine I really really like. And I was actually able to train it like quite hard. I backed off like 1 stack on everything. So instead of like the 12th stack on the leg extension, I did the 11, but still took them pretty much to failure. And I was very ginger with warming up and seeing how it was going to go. I was able to push it quite hard and then do some unilateral split squat stuff. Unfortunately, the instability is still kind of there. I went to a yoga class today with Jenny. We did a little Valentine's yoga class date. And I quickly realized like this knee is not, back to normal. Any kind of like yoga type stuff, like the lunges and moving and then like twisting in a lunge, like felt very, very unstable. And I was like very caught, like trepidatiously moving through some of the poses. So that was kind of like, okay, it's not, I'm good to train it when I can load it in like, okay, here are my feet planted in this bilateral position. My feet, my toes are straight in front of me. I can get full flexion squat. Like that stuff is fine. The most risky maneuvers, and this one actually popped up today because I had a pressing session, moving heavy dumbbells. Like when you're putting like the 70s or heavier back and you like laterally step, like that sort of thing is still like very kind of sketchy. So we'll see from there. I'm going to start incorporating a lot of just like balance type work and seeing if it's just some of the stabilizers in there. Potentially it is the meniscus. I'm not really sure. I don't think I'm ever really going to find out. So just going to continue kind of working around that.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's kind of, I think, what I expected. Like, it's just when you're when you're in that like sagittal plane and your feet are planted, like you said, and you can control variables, it kind of feels like things are okay. Like I kind of feel the same, when I'm biking. Like I'm like, wow, I can actually bike with no limitation. And then as soon as I start trying to move laterally or do anything dynamic, and it just feels very limited. So I guess just be thankful that we can at least keep training, and the rest will heal kind of as we continue strengthening it, I guess.
Yeah, that's the hope for me, at least
Yeah.
with this one.
Yeah. Cool. Well, just to be quick on the rest of my updates here, I am leaving for San Diego in 2 days. It'll be the February 16th when we leave on Thursday. And so we are taking the southern route because there is supposed to be a massive storm on the Continental Divide, literally Tuesday and Wednesday, starting today into tomorrow. Some areas are going to get 12 plus inches. I think we're only supposed to get between 4 and 7, which is still somewhat significant. Pretty concerned that they're going to cancel school on Wednesday, which is supposed to be my last day to like pack and do work and get ready before we leave for San Diego. And I really don't think we're going to have school. I also have 2 podcasts and a Zoom that I'm supposed to do that day. So we will see how all of that goes. Moving on. Bryan's program just started its new hypertrophy cycle yesterday, February 13th. Great time to hop on. We're in deload week, so even when this episode comes out the following week, it'll just be the beginning of week 1. Lots of new signups. Been super cool to see all of the people kind of trialing the program out. I think there's some excitement around the addition of cardio, and so that will be obviously our topic today as we get into it, and I'll talk about that. I did do my day on Bryan's program just a few days ago. That is the delt and quad specialization day. So it's basically, pretty even over 4 days. And then the 5th day is just delts and quads. That day was super fun. It's got some same muscle group supersets for the delts, actually 2 different sequences of that. And then the quad sequence is short overload leg extension directly into sissy squats. And that's one of the worst feelings I've ever had. And training. And it was a deload week. So it was like 2 to 3 RIR on leg extensions and like 5 RIR on sissy squats. And I still finished each set like grabbing my quads and bending over because it was so painful. So I both look forward to and don't look forward to progressing that one over the next few weeks. Final update. I mentioned last week that I think I mentioned that when I got my blood work done, I added the ApoB test as a test for lipid health, better than LDL and triglycerides, according to new research. So I got my ApoB result back, and it was 54, and anything under 90 is considered good. I would kind of skew that range to 60 is kind of what I've heard, is that you want that ApoB number under 60, even though the blood work says under 90 is okay. So I was happy. I was 54, pretty cool with that. But really disappointed in Life Extension delivering the remaining part of my blood work because it's now been 7 days and I've emailed them and I still have no additional blood work results back. So impatiently waiting for those, but I'm happy to get the ApoB back.
Is it, you said 7 days since you got your labs drawn?
Yeah.
I would say so you got some results back, but not all of them.
I got ApoB the next day, but that was the one single result, and then the rest of the labs haven't come back yet.
Yeah, that I've seen that with clients and stuff, or they come back like half and half. I've had some turnaround in like 3 days. I've had other ones take like 2 full weeks to come back. So
yeah, I'm just disappointed. I really wanted that information, but it's cool. It'll come when it comes.
Yeah. The last update from me, and this one's like I'm kind of excited about this. So I am like full on balls deep in my like gaining season per se, and I decided that like I'm going to treat, because it's very very common that like, oh well, it's calorie surplus, the margins for success are bigger, you're a little bit more lackadaisical with it, you kind of fall by the wayside of some of your structures because they're okay, as long as I'm dropping the pennies in the bucket, right, it's gonna going to turn out. That is what I had historically done in the past. And then kind of to bring it back really quickly, last winter botched gaining season. And then when summer came around, I had a coach, I dieted, and I was like, wow, I do not, this is worse. This is objectively worse than the previous year. And that's kind of a really big bummer when you have like an entire year investment cycle just to show, get there and be like, yeah, this isn't it. It's a lot of time investment to realize like, oh, I fucked up. So this year I'm a little bit more, I have like a little bit of vengeance, like vendetta kind of on that. So I've been taking everything super, super seriously. I've been like following my meal plan pretty much to a T I'm on like week 6 or 7 right now. Lo and behold, it is working better. What's kind of wild to me is I don't have answers for this, but this is purely kind of anecdote. Things are progressing. Like my weights are progressing like really, really good. I did eat late last night, but I woke up, I was like a 204.5, which is like, back at the end of, in December, I was still in the like 196s sort of thing. Yeah. So weight is moving, and there is body fat with that. But I'm also like really happy to report that I'm not really concerned about the body fat. It's not like quickly coming on. It's just like notable, the lower back, the lower abs sort of thing, especially seated. But I'm really, really excited. I want to push to kind of the top end of that target range, which is going to be around like 208. And then I think we'll go from there sort of thing. But cool. I am excited for that. So it's just been, the last note I have here is the one thing, and this is what Bryan, you and I talked about off air. The meal frequency is the first time I've actually like stuck to a higher meal frequency like this with a lower protein intake per serving to really kind of maximize the MPS signaling. Mm-hmm. And so far it's actually working quite well, which has been good. And I haven't been skipping abs either, which is very impressive.
And no cramps.
That one time it did, but it's
when you were
recent
sick,
enough.
Yeah.
It's recent enough though I'm terrified. Like, when you get a pump like in your shoulders or chest or whatever, you're like, man, this feels good. In the abs, like I can't distinguish, like, is this just an ab pump or am I on the verge of like ruining my entire day? And I can get to like the first set, but after that I'm like just on high alert. Like I just hope it doesn't happen again.
That's hilarious. I have not been doing abs at all. I haven't done a single set in probably 3 or 4 months. It's just one of those things, I actually, I was surprised because I haven't done abs at all. And so in my last cycle, for the strength cycle, I had weighted pull-ups in there. And because my abs literally hadn't been trained at all, I got so sore in my abs the first time I did weighted pull-ups. Like, this is the type of soreness you get after 60 GHDs or something like that. And from fucking pull-ups. But then, repeated bout effect, I didn't get sore again after that. So just kind of funny. I know you're generally a high protein guy. Like, I know, especially when you diet, you're a higher protein guy. Like, I've seen you up at 250, 270, stuff like that. Where's the protein at in the gaining phase?
250, wow. 255.
Yeah. That is quite high. All right, cool. Should we jump into the topic?
Let's dive into some cardio.
All right. So, yeah, we're talking about cardio. Specifically, we're going to focus on zone 2 and zone 5, which are kind of two extremes of the cardio zones, because zone 1 would be kind of considered walking or like lower level effort, where like I would call that like your all day, no issue pace. Like you could just keep it conversational, no heavy breathing, that sort of thing. One distinction I do want to kind of clarify real quick is, as I was going through and researching this episode, I've always operated on a 1 through 5 zone system, where zone 1 is walking, like I was saying. Zone 2 is kind of what we're going to discuss today. And then zone 5 is your top end zone. But what I found as I was Googling the zones, especially when I started Googling zone 2, is that it was pulling up a ton of information from the cycling world. And apparently they use 6 zones. So the confusing part here is that when you talk about zone 2 in the way that I'm going to talk about it, it's one way. But when you talk about zone 2 on the 6 zone system, zone 2 is about 10% easier than what I'm going to talk about zone 2 as. And so I think there actually is confusion around that, because I've even heard people in the Paragon Facebook group being like, no, zone 2 is just barely above walking. And other people being like, no, zone 2 is like pretty miserable. You have to do it for an hour type thing. And I kind of fall more on the side of zone 2 being moderately difficult than on the side of zone 2 being easier. And so I think that's just that distinction between whether you're using the 6-zone system or the 5-zone system as we're talking about this. So just as we go through this today, I will be referring to this as the 5-zone system. Have you are you familiar with that distinction, or had you not heard of that?
Yeah, I saw it, but I mean, the overwhelming majority of everything that I've read and like look at, it's the 5 zone system. Like
Yeah.
the watches and things I've seen are still all using the 5 zones.
So I actually think the Garmin, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but Laura, my COO at Paragon, she
Mhm.
um she was pointing out how her zone 2 had her heart rate between like I might be butchering this, but it was something like 110 to 129 or something like that, which for a 29-year-old, she's 29, that should be a zone above that. So I think that the default for the Garmin was set for zone 2 to be a much easier pace. What does yours show?
My zone 2 and my Garmin is 112 to 130,
Yeah, so that's
which is
also
like
too
an
easy. That's it.
easier. However, it's
Yeah.
calling my zone 5 167 and above,
Oh, so it is a 5-zone system. It just seems to be shifted back a little bit or whatever.
shifted down a
Um,
little bit. Yeah.
Slightly. Yeah. That's interesting. So either way, there is definitely some variance there. And so maybe check your device and stuff like that. But I'm going to go through a ton of ways here that we can assess zone 2 as I describe it without having to worry about what your watch tells you anyways. Okay. So what are the distinctions, right? Zone 2 is generally a sustainable output that is usually within the range of 45 to 90 minutes. So it's quite long. And if you're going to sustain something for 90 minutes or 45 minutes, it has to be sustainable. Like if you're pushing hard for 45 minutes, then it's probably not something you can sustain for 90 minutes, but you should be able to sustain zone 2 for 45 to 90 minutes, meaning it's not your all day sustainable pace. Like you couldn't go walk a marathon and be like, I was in zone 2. But at the same time, you're also not pushing so hard that you can't sustain it for at least 90 minutes. So I think that that's an important distinction there. Whereas when we're talking about zone 5, we're talking about getting your heart rate up to above 90% of your age predicted maximum, or if you knew your actual maximum, that would obviously be better than your age predicted maximum. But age predicted maximum being 220 minus your age. So for me, that would be 180 would be my maximum heart rate. I have actually seen my heart rate on my watch get up into the high 170s many times from just biking up a hill. So my guess is that my actual max heart rate is probably slightly above 180. Like if I were to do a 20-second Airdyne sprint, like as hard as I could possibly go, I think it would get above 180. I don't know that for sure because I haven't seen it, but I think that would be kind of some cool information for people to have if you want to get on an Airdyne and do that. I also would say that from my experience, your heart rate doesn't peak after the first 20-second interval. It usually probably takes 3 or 4 intervals for you to actually reach that maximum. So you may have to do it a couple times. Any thoughts on any of that, Aaron?
Yeah, what I thought was the first thing I thought was quite interesting is like I wonder like how are people finding their like max heart rate? And I understand the prediction and stuff like that, but I mean if you think about it, it's kind of like a little bit scary, right? Like how when does like the quest for the maximum become very dangerous to pursue sort of
Yeah.
thing? Um, just because like kind of like jumping back to what I was saying, like I've been following my shit to a T, and that includes my cardio session, and it beats me into the ground each week. But like part of the goal is like, hey, try and spike, the heart rate. Um, I feel awful. It feels absolutely awful, and I'm only getting into like the 174, 175, and that is me trying as hard as I can, and I feel absolutely horrible. So Yeah,
But you're on a stair stepper, right?
I'm on a assault bike.
Oh, I thought you were on a stair stepper because you mentioned that
No,
being your
when I'm doing
preferred.
like my cardio, like my hit,
Okay,
I'm doing almost exclusively on the assault bike or Airdyne
gotcha.
fan bike, whatever. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, because I was gonna say, like, as we get into zone 5, I'm gonna talk about different types of equipment that are better or worse for each purpose.
Yeah.
And obviously for zone 5, we want something with like super fast turnover. And so if you're doing a stair stepper, you're already limited by how quickly you can move.
Hmm.
But a bike with arms that move as well is obviously going to be the number one tool there. So with that distinction out of the way between zone 2 and zone 5, essentially, why zone 2? Like, what is the benefit of zone 2? What's the benefit of kind of going slow, sustainable, and just that monotonous misery, right? And it comes down to our mitochondria. And so our mitochondrial function in our body controls a lot of things, specifically the ability to use fat or glucose as an energy source. And when you have mitochondria that increase in both number, function, and flexibility, your body can more easily convert glucose into fats and then into ATP. So you have a much more efficient metabolic system. And then over the course of time, as your mitochondria improve in function, flexibility, and number, it will have a direct effect on the accumulation of metabolic disease as we age. Anything to add to any of that description? Cool.
No, I mean it's you pretty much obviously hit the nail on the head well with the defining it, but it's just it helps you become more efficient at things you want to be efficient at doing.
Yeah. And so it's not that zone 5 doesn't increase mitochondrial function, but it primarily does it within fast twitch muscle. And zone 2 does it more systemically and in slow twitch muscle. And when you think about we as humans, and especially as we age, we have less and less and less time spent in that explosive fast twitch state. Not that we don't want to continue to develop fast twitch muscle, which is essentially what we do with weightlifting. Um, but zone 5 and weightlifting are much more similar in what the adaptations that they're going to have on your body, whereas zone 2 is going to be a completely different adaptation that most people that lift weights just completely ignore. So I think that's why zone 2 gets such a big focus, especially in the weightlifting community these days. So kind of with that definition out of the way and the why, um, best equipment choices for zone 2. And for this one, it's kind of the opposite of what you would want for zone 5, because in zone 2, you want something that allows you to be sustainable and to remain in a relatively tight output range. So for that reason, running and rowing are usually pretty poor choices for people to try to do zone 2. Not because inherently they're bad, but because most people are inefficient runners, are inefficient rowers, and therefore are going to be incapable of maintaining a 5 to 10 beat per minute heart rate zone output level throughout the course of their 45 to 90-minute session. So using something like an elliptical or a stationary bike are probably going to be better tools to be able to maintain consistent output. Have you experienced any of that too? I mean, I know you and I both are poor runners, but
The maintaining consistent or constant output is a really, really big part there.
yeah,
Personally, a simple way that I like to frame it and what I have found works best with myself is using a modality where you need to support your own body weight, because that inherently provides some of its own work. Personally, when I've tried to hit like the zone two that like how describing it, how you describe it, Bryan, which is do you feel confident giving like a ballpark heart rate range
yeah.
for
So
like, let's
that's all
say,
part of my outline. I was going to get into
okay,
that.
all right,
Yeah,
I won't gloss over that though.
yeah. Okay.
I have found like using a stationary bike that is just a spin bike, not with the handles as well, like an Airdyne. I'm getting into that like lactate threshold, lactic buildup to try and get my heart rate up. Whereas like a stair climber with it, you can set the constant pace for the elliptical, something where you are supporting your body weight. It is a little bit more sustainable because you're not pushing as hard to get into the target range because there are parts of those modalities that are inherently more challenging in and of themselves.
No, that's a really, really good point. And so specifically about the stationary bike, this is one that I really struggle with, and I didn't realize how much I struggled with that to get my heart rate high enough until I tried to sit on Kim's Peloton and do an hour of Pelotoning, which I discussed on the episode maybe a month ago or something. But basically what I found was that my legs were burning so bad because my arms aren't helping. So my legs have to essentially do all of the work for the entire body to elevate my heart rate up to the desired amount. That I couldn't actually get my heart rate high enough because my legs would fatigue first. And I think from talking to other people, I think that's mostly a me problem. It's an issue of the fact that I think I just have always had really fast twitch muscle fiber dominance in my lower body specifically. And due to that, I just clear lactate very poorly. And so for me, I've found it much more effective to do modalities for zone 2 where I can use both my upper body and lower body, like rowing. I'm actually quite an efficient rower through all those years of CrossFit. I spent like an entire year trying to learn how to row. And so it stuck with me. I'm a pretty good rower. But like an Airdyne bike at a moderate pace or rowing seem to be more effective for me than other modalities. Like I've even tried incline walking, and I jacked that thing up to like a 12 or 13 degree incline at a 3.3 speed. And that got my heart rate high enough as well. But again, my legs started burning because I wasn't able to also utilize upper body output. So I think ultimately, it's about finding the type of cardio equipment or source that works best for you, using the metrics that I'm going to describe below here to try and find that rate for you. So ultimately, the gold standard of measuring zone 2 is lactate. And amazingly, I've had 2 people that follow Bryan's program go out and buy lactate meters off Amazon. And now I feel like I need to buy a lactate meter because the people that are following my program are doing it before I even have one. So I think that as soon as I get to San Diego, I'm going to buy one and have it shipped out there so that I can have that data as well. You guys know I love data. But essentially, when it comes to lactate, from what I understand, at rest, so if you just wake up in the morning and you get out of bed and you prick your finger, a healthy individual without metabolic disease, their lactate should be somewhere between 0.7 and 1.0 at rest. And when you're doing zone 2, you want it to be between 1.7 and 2.0. So it's really only double what it is at rest. And the problem with pushing lactate higher than 2 is that apparently is the point where it becomes a runaway train. So if you're say your lactate is 2.2, 2.3, 2.4 like that, and you're like, oh, I'm really close. It's cool. I'm just barely above it, Well, then that begins to climb. So it becomes 2.5, then 2.6 and 2.67. And that is out of your control. It's just because you're above 2, it becomes this like exponential increase that becomes a runaway train of sorts. And so to specifically be sustainable, you want to be between that 1.7 and 2.0 millimole per liter. I don't actually know. And I'm very curious because I think I'm doing a sustainable output, but maybe I am on that runaway train. Like sometimes I get to 45 to 60 minutes and I'm like so thankful that my cardio is over. I wonder if I'm letting that train run away a little bit on me. So I am excited to try that and get like a super, super accurate. But for people that aren't going to go on Amazon and buy a lactate meter and prick their finger, because there are a number of precautions that you need to take when doing that, such as it needs to be within 30 seconds of finishing exercise, or it needs to be mid-exercise. and you need to have a completely clean hand because apparently lactate settles on your skin, and you can get an errored reading if you try to prick your finger without cleaning it with soap and hot water. Which makes that kind of a difficult proposition to be like, okay, I have 30 seconds when I finish my exercise, but I also have to clean my hands with soapy water. That's a bit challenging. So something I'll kind of have to figure out as the time comes. But using more crude metrics of determining your zone 2, the most crude would probably be what they call a stressed conversation. But it's not like you can have different levels of stressed conversation. And I realized this when I was talking to, again, Laura from Paragon. And she goes on she does 14ers around Colorado, these big hikes that take 3 or 4 hours. And she talks through them the entire time. But when she looks at her watch at the end, it's showing her that she's in zone 3 and zone 4 the whole time. So she's able to talk through zone 3 and zone 4, which makes that a difficult metric if you just say a stressed conversation. So it should be a stressed conversation with no gasping and with clear enunciation of all words. So essentially the idea being that you could be on a business call or on a podcast, and it's just like you let them know in the beginning, like, hey, I'm going to be doing zone 2 while we do this podcast, but like you can still do it. You can still get all your points across. It's just they're going to know that you're probably exercising while you're doing it. So slightly above just like walking and talking, you know? So that would be like a super crude way of assessing it. And then a slightly less crude way would be to take 180 minus your age. So remember, the age predicted max heart rate was 220 minus your age. So now we're taking 180 minus your age. And then what you'll want to do is discount that 5 to 10 beats per minute if you are in poor cardiovascular shape, and you'll want to increase that 5 to 10 beats per minute if you're in good cardiovascular shape or great cardiovascular shape. So for mine, 180 minus my age puts me at 140. And because I'm not in great cardiovascular shape, I generally do my zone 2 around 135 beats per minute, which is going to be 45, even though my age is 40. And that tends to be good for me. Like I can, like I said, sustain that for an hour. I am always glad when my hour is up, and I just don't know if that's because my lactate is too high, or if it's because I just fucking hate cardio and I'm just really thankful that my hour is up. So I think the lactate will shed some light on that if and when I end up getting one of those lactate meters. Another kind of way of doing this is to use FTP. And so FTP stands for functional threshold power. And functional threshold power is defined as the hardest amount of effort you can do for an hour. And it doesn't necessarily have to be sustainable. It's just the most output that you can do for an hour. I mean, and talk about miserable. Like, it's like, just imagine getting on a rower or an assault bike and being like, my goal is to get as the highest wattage number I can for an entire hour. But because that's not reasonable for most people to do, you can use the 20-minute FTP test, and then you discount that 10%. So if you say that I can maintain, or that my max output for 20 minutes is 220 watts, say, then you would discount that and say that your zone 2, or rather your FTP, is 200. So FTP is not zone 2. FTP is the hardest you can work for an hour in an unsustainable way. Zone 2 is going to be a percentage of your FTP. So we'll just continue with that example. Say your FTP is 200. So you did the FTP test, but you did the 20-minute version, and say you got 220 as your wattage output. You discount that 10%. You say your FTP is 200. And then for your zone 2 work, you would take 85 to 95% of your FTP. So in this case, using watts, 200 watts would be your FTP. 85 to 95% of that would be 170 to 190 watts that you essentially could sustain for that 45 to 90 minute period. And that also tends to be pretty accurate for me. I've done the 20-minute test, and I was just above 200. So I do tend to maintain about 170 as my watts that I can do for zone 2. But unfortunately, a lot of machines don't have wattage. Most bikes do, but most treadmills do not. Jordan Lips and I have been communicating back and forth about this a lot because he's trying to buy a treadmill for his house that has watts on it, but only the commercial grade treadmills seem to have watts. So you're talking about like $3,000 to $6,000 for a treadmill instead of, a simple at home one that you could get for $600 or something like that. They don't seem to have watts. So they're also, if you use a smart device, a lot of times they will have wattage output for any activity you're doing. So it doesn't really matter if the machine itself has the wattage output. It may be available on your smart device, like on your watch or your chest strap or whatever. But watts is a cool metric because at least in the cycling world and in the longevity world, they use the metric of watts per kilo as a defining metric for A, your fitness, but B, your lack of fitness. And so when I first started doing zone 2 training a number of months ago, I could only hold just over 1.5 watts per kilo for my zone 2. And so if I weigh 90 kilos, I was holding 150. So that's actually not quite just over 1.5. It's maybe more like 1.7 or something like that. But from what I understand, people that are pre-diabetic and have, fledgling metabolic disease, they tend to be able to hold 1.5 watts per kilo. So that's kind of like a bottom barrel number of output for somebody that's not in great cardiovascular shape and has poor mitochondrial function. You're going to be at about 1.5 watts per kilo. So since then, now I'm up to about 170 watts and I weigh just under 90 kilos. So I'm actually now up to 2 watts per kilo, which is significant improvement. And one of the coolest things about cardio is that you really do see these adaptations happen quite quickly. And so that's been really cool for me and motivating. But if you do have the ability to assess your fitness in terms of watts per kilo and not just in terms of watts or heart rate, I think that's a pretty cool metric, and one that you'll see increase as body weight goes down too, obviously, because it's a metric of watts per kilo and not just a measure of total watts. That even if your total watts go down slightly when you lose body weight because you're a less powerful human, you may still see your watts per kilo go up. Not to say that, you should go out there on a mission to lose weight, but as you go through the different stages of nutritional periodization, you may notice that your watts per kilo changes as well within respect to zone 2. Any thoughts, dude?
No, I mean, so much of that is all brand new to me. And as you were going through it, I was just thinking about the FTP, functional threshold power. I was like, "Fuck, dude, that sounds absolutely horrendous to actually monitor." And then the watts one, I think it is really cool. I'd have to check. I have my cardio day in 2 days, but I guess it would be more relative to once we get into the zone 5 conversation, but I'm curious to see if you know any about the wattage kind of output there, respective to anything.
I don't really.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll get into that shortly, but I don't know anything about wattage or watts per kilo. It's really going to just be the maximum output that you can do. And I think that that's more with respect to total body mass and total muscle mass than it is to cardiovascular function.
Yes.
Because you've had people like, if you remember back in the day, Danny Nichols in the CrossFit world, who was like this massive behemoth OPEX athlete who was like 225, 5'9", and just like, what is he cleaning 405 for reps or something stupid like that? But that dude could get the assault bike up to, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was like double the amount of watts that I could create. I want to say it was close to like 2000 or something like that. But if I'm on an assault bike and I'm just doing like an all out 20-second as hard as I can go, I can get that thing above 1,000 watts. It's just not sustainable.
Okay, so that kind of led me into when I was most recently doing my cardio. Only one of the bikes at the gym has like a functioning display, but this one, the wattage was functioning, and I could max it out at 999. And then
Okay.
each round, like it was my goal to like see how long I could hold on to that max output at 999 as I was doing it, and that was enough of like gamification to take my mind away briefly
Yeah.
from how horrendous I felt. But I was like, I'm pretty sure that was watts, but I can't remember, and that's what led me to that.
Yeah. It's just like they climb exponentially with output. Um, and so when you're like, oh, I can create 1,000 watts for 20 seconds or whatever it is, that just has no correlation at all to what you can do for 20 minutes or 60 minutes. Because one is an example of just maximal output, and one is as a function of cardiovascular fitness.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So yeah, I already covered the watts as a function of metabolic disease. So to wrap up zone 2, essentially the cool thing that I've kind of realized in doing zone 2 is that it sort of is similar to how we've discussed the philosophical approach to progressive overload in regards to weight training. How instead of forcing progressive overload, you kind of wait for your performance to tell you that you need to progressive overload. And so in respect to weight training, that would be instead of benching 225 for 10 and then being like, okay, next week I need to do either 230 for 10 or 225 for 11. You just kind of hang out at 225, and then you notice over time that 225 is too easy. And because you notice that it's now too easy, you then have to increase the weight so that it still remains challenging. And that's kind of exactly how we want to approach progressive overload with zone 2 training. We don't want to go into sessions and be like, well, last time I did 170 watts, so this time I'm going to do 173 watts. Because if you do that, you're essentially going to risk pushing your heart rate out of its zone 2 range, which is where all that mitochondrial function, flexibility, and adaptation occurs. Not that zone 3 and zone 4 don't have their own benefits as well, and that we should completely ignore those zones. But when you're trying to specifically train mitochondrial function within the spectrum of zone 2 training, you want to keep your heart rate constant. And so within the notion of keeping heart rate consistent, then you can increase watts as you can still maintain a lower heart rate over time. So when you're doing 170 watts and you say, wow, that was really easy, I wonder what my heart rate was. And you're like, oh, my heart rate was only 130 today and it's supposed to be 135. Well, next time maybe you try to do more watts as a result of trying to get your heart rate higher. So it kind of works as like a chicken and the egg thing that way. But that's really all I have on zone 2. Anything to add there before we move on?
No, I guess like just to wrap that one up for anyone who's potentially not potentially having a hard time grasping it a little bit. The heart rate is the goal, right? So pushing yourself to achieve a higher output that drives you outside of that essentially goal is potentially a different goal, but different from the goal of the improving the mitochondrial function there. So the heart rate is the actual goal of the activity.
Yeah, lactate would be the goal, but heart rate as a proxy for lactate.
As a proxy, yes. Thank you.
So zone 5 is like, as we've kind of discussed here and there throughout this whole episode, a maximal output. And it builds mitochondrial function as well, but specific to fast twitch muscle, which, as I described earlier, is very similar to what weightlifting does. So both weightlifting and zone 5 are going to have impacts on mitochondrial function in fast twitch muscle. However, weightlifting does not impact our VO2 max, and training zone 5 has the largest impact on VO2 max. So like zone 2, it will have some impact on VO2 max just through increasing mitochondrial function and oxygen supply and ATP conversion and all that stuff. But training zone 5 is actually going to have a much more significant impact on VO2 max because you're pushing the capacity of what your lungs can handle. In zone 2, you're never at that point where you're like, right? But when you're doing zone 5, that is literally the end of every interval is you doing that. And so the purpose of why zone 5 matters for life, I think, is a little bit less relevant than zone 2. Because a situation in daily life as you get older where you would need to be in zone 5, like maybe a like reaching example would be you're at the airport and they have one of those really long escalators, but it's broken and you have like 2 bags in each hand or something along those lines. And you need to climb up this broken escalator and you don't want to wait for the elevator or something along those lines. Right. But it's basically a 20 to 60 second cardiovascular task with a high output level in daily life. And like, there just aren't very many examples of that. Like throughout daily life, if you're not trying to get into zone 5, you don't often get into zone 5. So I think its applicability to daily life is a bit lower, but because VO2 max has the highest correlation to longevity of any variable, it becomes relevant in that way. So when you look at the mortality risk, if you're in the top 2.5% of VO2 max, which let's be fucking real, I'm never going to get there. But if you're in the top 2.5% of VO2 max, you have a 5 times less chance of dying from all-cause mortality than somebody in the bottom 25%. And to compare that to weightlifting, if you're in the top 2.5% of muscle mass or strength, that gives you a 3-to-1 chance of not dying from all-cause mortality compared to the bottom 25%. So as long as you're like in that top 25%, like I was referencing top 2.5%, but if you're in the top 25% of both strength, muscle mass, and VO2 max, that's going to give you a ton of advantage long-term over somebody that's not in the top 25% on both of those. And those are the 2 highest correlates against all-cause mortality of anything out there. So that's pretty cool. What was the other thing I was going to say? Okay, so injury risk with zone 5 is important too. And that is specific to me because the last 2 times I've tried to do zone 5 running, I tore my plantar fascia in June and then I popped my hamstring 10 days ago. Both times running, both times sprinting. So I don't believe that zone 5 is inherently risky on its own. I think it's the fact that I was implementing that with running. I do want to throw out some caution that zone 5 can be risky if you're not, if you don't work out, like in some capacity. Like if you don't push your heart rate, like if you were a couch potato and somebody was like, dude, you got to do some zone 5, and you pop up off the couch and get yourself on an Airdyne and push your heart rate to 180 or whatever that is, like that's probably going to have some risk associated with it. But if you're an athlete, you lift weights, you generally do some form of cardio, you should be able to get yourself into zone 5 in a safer type of equipment than running with relatively little risk. Clearly I'm not a doctor, so please check with your doctor if you are worried about zone 5 training in your heart. As far as equipment selection for zone 5, we want 2 things. One, we want one that you're either inefficient at. So rowing and running would potentially be better choices for zone 5 because people are inefficient at them, which allows your heart rate to spike very quickly. However, you also want something with really fast turnover, because if you're going to be doing sprints, the rower is kind of a tough one to do sprints on because you have half of your time is spent on the what's called the slide stroke, which is the descent, and there's no output occurring as you're descending that slide stroke. So you're only getting half of the time that you're actually on the rower is time where you're creating output. So therefore, I think running is a better choice than rowing, but definitely more risky for injury. And I just think that using the stair stepper or using the Airdyne bike, air bike of some sort with arms that move, is just going to allow you to create the most output with the least risk. What do you think?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The one thought I had in my mind is if you do want to do running, sprinting, hill sprinting, maybe a little bit
Yes.
safer of
Yeah.
a form. Um, and then, yeah, to piggyback on what you said, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I tried to do my cardio session, which is my hit session, where I'm like peaking into zone 5 on the rower, and I couldn't get into that range. And I promise you, I was literally going as hard as I could, and I
Yeah.
just couldn't get there. Like there's just too much
Interesting.
downtime between each of the rowing strokes.
Strokes.
Is it called
Yeah.
strokes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I just the assault bike, the Airdyne, the fan one, it's constant movement, right?
Yeah.
Whatever leg in arm is technically not working, but even though since you can push and pull, they're kind of
Yeah.
always working. I guess you get one leg that technically isn't working at each kind of
Interval.
progression.
Yeah. But you have three
Yeah,
quarters of your, well, yeah, more or less three quarters of your body working at the same time. And the
more or
turnover
less. Yeah.
speed is so fast. So like you can be doing 100, 120 strokes a minute. So like even if you have a three quarters of your body not working at one point, it's only for a quarter of a second or a half a second that it's not working.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
so I think air bike is probably the best one too. And I'm actually torn right now because I'm going to buy a piece of cardio equipment to do my stuff on. And like, I really enjoy rowing. I enjoy rowing way more than I enjoy the assault bike. I find it more comfortable. I think it emulates patterns of daily life much more, like bending over and triple extension of ankles, knees, and hips, or at least ankles and knees. But it emulates daily life much more, whereas an assault bike, like very rarely do we ever push in daily life, not to mention in that form of setting. So I'm torn on which one to get. I just think the air bike is probably going to be more applicable to both zones, whereas the rower, just not great for zone 5 for me. Somebody super inefficient at it, maybe, but yeah, we'll see. I'm gonna ruminate on that while we're in San Diego. So about zone 5, like we've discussed a lot about it as regards to like maximal output in like a 20 to 60-second period, but there's actually a ton of ways that you can get your heart rate into zone 5. For example, one extreme is what they call the VO2 max training template, sort of, is a sequence of 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, and doing that for between 4 and 6 rounds. So if each round is 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, that's 8 minutes per round. You do 4 rounds of that, that's 32 minutes. If you did 6 rounds, that would be 48 minutes. So you're somewhere between a half hour and 45 minutes. And each 4-minute period is the hardest you can push for that 4-minute period. So essentially what that means is that by the end of that 4-minute period, when you go to your 4-minute rest, you are breathing as hard as you possibly can and gasping for air, meaning that your heart rate is as high as your heart rate is going to go. So I've done this test and I can get my heart rate just as high doing this 4-minute test at the end of it as I can doing a 20-second all-out sprint or Airdyne interval. It's just much more miserable to go through 3 minutes and 40 seconds to get to that 4 minutes than it is to do 20 seconds to get there. However, because it's much more miserable and because you're consuming a ton more oxygen in that 4-minute period, it will have more impact on improving your VO2 max than doing a 20-second on, 2-minute off, or whatever that protocol is that you decide to implement. So on the two extremes, you have 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, and you have 20 seconds on, a number of minutes off, just different output levels for different periods of time, and then everything in between. So you could do 1 minute on, 1 minute off, 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off. You could do one of Anders and I's favorite cardio workouts from, man, back when we first met in college was an increasing RPE workout. So you would do 1 minute at RPE 6, a minute at RPE 7, a minute at RPE 8, and a minute at RPE 9. And then you would just recycle that and go back to 6, 7, 8, 9, 6, 7, 8, 9, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then on the last one, when you know you're done, you follow the 9 by a 10. and then that one just puts you in a hole and you're done. And so there's tons and tons of different ways that you can go about getting your heart rate into that 90% plus of its maximum amount. And so zone 5 becomes a little bit more malleable in equipment selection, in work to rest ratio, and how you really want to go about implementing that. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's really well said.
Cool. Cool. Well, that's all I have on zone 5. So I think now the last thing would be, it's the one before we move on. The last thing to say is that it does tend to have more of a crossover effect on leg training. So specifically depending on the modality you choose, like if you were to run sprints, that's going to have a huge impact on your leg training because running is impact itself. Whereas if you're doing an assault bike or rower, it probably has less impact. But just by the nature of pushing as hard as you can in something that involves your legs, it's going to have some sort of impact on your leg training. And so that wraps up my deep dive into zone 5 and kind of pushes me into the final piece of this segment, this episode, which is kind of how to combine programming these cardio days with hypertrophy training. And so when you look at the way that I'm implementing this in Bryan's program right now, I have a 9-day microcycle. And in that 9-day microcycle, there are 5 weightlifting days and then 4 non-weightlifting days. The way I actually wrote it out was to put each cardio session on a rest day, because when I write it in the app, it just it's not as streamlined or as easy to write it in. If I were to write it in on a lifting day, it would end up kind of being like a footnote at the bottom of that lifting day. And I didn't want it to appear that way. So I wrote them in outside of that. But I think that in a perfect optimal world, what you would really want to do is leverage the upper body days as a potential option where you would double up. And obviously this depends on how much time you have in your day. Like if you can do a cardio session and a weight training session in the same day. And I'm sure many people cannot. But what I've found to be working best for me is to throw one of my cardio sessions on an upper body day, try to follow that with a rest day, and then have the leg day next, so that you're essentially 2 days away, like 48 hours apart from when you did your cardio to your leg day. And then, so, I mean, there's a number of ways that you can organize that. I think if you were to follow it exactly as I wrote it, which is essentially upper body, zone 2, then lower body, that's also not the end of the world. Like if you're doing a zone 2 session, that's going to have significantly less impact on your fast twitch muscle fiber in your legs, and you have a full 24 hours between that session and then your lower body session, I personally haven't noticed any deleterious effects from that. I do find myself being much more cautious about where I place zone 5 sessions. And so I think that placing those in close proximity before a leg day is for sure a poor idea. I think doing it in relatively close proximity after a leg day, probably not quite as big of a deal, especially if you have a meal in between. And then depending on the modality that you use, you may just find it a little more difficult to get going in the beginning of the work, because your legs kind of have that dead leg feeling where you're just not producing a ton of force with them. But once you kind of warm up and clear some of that lactate in there, I've found that to be okay as well. But ultimately, I think what this really boils down to is what period of nutritional periodization you're in. Because if you are in a deficit, then you have to be much more conscious of where you place these cardio days, or even if you're going to do cardio at all. Whereas when you're in a surplus or maintenance plus, whatever you want to call it, you just have more resources to recover. And therefore, I think impact, the negative impact of the cardio days it's just mitigated a little bit.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there at the end with the recovery capacity. One note that I wanted to add on the zone 5 is if you are utilizing like the Airdyne sprints or something like that, um, I have seen it where it's actually there's no really good way to quantify it, but added as additional quad volume because it is like training the quads at higher reps. You will produce a gnarly quad pump.
Yeah.
Doing like interval sprints on there. So taking that into consideration, if you are going to have that zone 5 day away further enough from a quad training session, it will provide you a little bit of like metabolite kind of stimuli that you could potentially replace from a secondary day. Would you have like a high reps of leg extensions or something like that, you would get a very similar effect.
Yeah, especially if you're doing the short intervals, like the 20 to 30 second all out bursts, that emulate more like a weight training set. Whereas if you're doing like a 4 on 4 off, like you may still accumulate a ton of metabolites and your legs still burn, but it's like doing, a 400 rep set of leg extensions or something. You want to do one of those?
No. Oh my God. No.
Yeah.
No.
Cool. Well, that's really all I got, man. Next week I will be in San Diego, so we'll have our new time recording the podcast. But other than that, everything should continue week to week. We should have episodes coming out.
Yep. I am very much looking forward to Bryan in San Diego because you will get an 8 a.m. Aaron and not a 10 p.m. Aaron. There was a couple times in this episode where I'm like trying to hold my yawns in, but like I am tired.
It's all good. No one's watching your face. We're cool.
Yeah. I'll be very excited to have my cup of coffee ready to go at 8 a.m. doing this.
Nice.
So
I dig that. All right, guys. We'll catch y'all next week.
As always, thank you for listening. Talk to you guys next week.